I'm just constantly reminded of the impermanent nature of everything, of every moment, of every season, of every cycle. We are constantly in a state of change, and to know that and to like hold it and embrace it, I don't know, there's, I think, more of an ease with which you can walk through life. Maybe are less attached to like outcomes, focus on, you know, what's in front of you and who you're serving in this moment.
Mm-hmm. A death doula is a person similar to a midwife who offers services to help comfort the dying and the people closest to them during the process of transitioning. Some of their services, though not limited to, can include practical planning, helping with final arrangements with respect to the dying, do not resuscitate or DNR orders, holistic approaches to end-of-life care, helping with moral, spiritual, and physical support for the dying and their loved ones, as well as providing some education and services to hold ritual viewings in the home of the newly deceased. But not every death doula provides the same services. However, their main objective is to encourage and educate, especially in our death-phobic culture here in the West, to speak more freely about a part of our lives that arguably begins from birth.
This one patient just popped into my mind. She kept saying that she was just ready to go to the disco. She was ready. That was like her euphemism. She was this like beautiful woman, like in her 70s, like very glamorous. And she was just like so kind of free and just like ready. And every time I would see her, she's like, it's one day closer to the disco.
Wow. Greetings and welcome to the Quake City Portal. Our next guest, Stephanie Crawford, is a hospice care nurse and death doula. She recently founded Awakened Endings, an end-of-life service and community dedicated to helping others understand and prepare for a better death. In this conversation, you'll hear both a heavy and lighthearted approach to talking about the transition of death. You'll learn about what a death cafe is, what a green burial is, what some commonalities she's witnessed observing people weeks away from their last breath, and much, much more. It's an educational tool for those learning how to approach caring for a dying loved one. And in piecing this episode together, I noticed much of what is said during this conversation can also be a metaphor for having meaningful relationships with someone who is still alive and healthy. Because why wait until someone is dying to listen and finally get to know who they really are? You'll also hear firsthand what kind of person is willing to take on this role of helping bring death back into our culture. Not as a traumatic, avoidable topic of discussion, but a reverent, growth transitioning, healing rite of passage. To quote Stephen Jenkinson, author of Die Wise, "Death is not what happens to you, it's what you do." Stephanie's website and blog are a welcome resource and educational hub for this discussion, and we hope to move in this direction with this podcast and have more of these conversations going forward, as well as hope to inspire these same discussions within you and with your loved ones. So with that, please reach out to Stephanie. I'll list these in the show notes on the QuakeCityPortal.com. Her website, awakenedendings.com. Her Instagram at awakened_endings. And with that, please enjoy this conversation with Stephanie Crawford, death doula.
I also feel like, and maybe it's just through my death work, like there is so much that matters, but there's so much that doesn't matter, you know?
Yeah, right.
And I don't know, maybe that's what kind of helps me discern between what I need to believe in and what I don't.
Do you feel that your death work, because this is where I'm coming from, is sometimes when things get a little bit too heady, if I'm a little bit down on myself for any reason, I don't know, let's just say I'm not, this is a thought that comes into my mind a lot, is I'm not doing enough for any, I don't know, it could be any random thing. What always brings me back is thinking about death in that way, where shit, we're all gonna die anyway, like what does it matter? 100 years from now, I don't know, is that something that you have in your mind when you're feeling that way? Is that normal, you think?
Yeah, I think it's always good to have death kind of as a context. I think it's important to not like become nihilistic about it, where it's like, what is the point of anything? Because I think that can lead us into like dark places. And it's still important to be like an active participant in our life, even though we know that one day it is all going to come to an end. There's still so much opportunity to experience pleasure and joy, and to create the life that you want. And in fact, I even think that knowing that this is all going to end one day is motivation for doing the things that are important to us and that are like aligned with our values. And also, like, thoughts are just thoughts, they come and go. I know sometimes they can be really powerful. But I think more than anything, at least for me, death is like, it's like a light for me to help me see like what's important to me and how do I want to live.
Yeah. And your life's work up to this point, as a nurse, as a hospice care worker, and death doula, that is, wow, that sounds very like a responsibility that's pretty, it's a heavy undertaking, I'm sure. But I want to go back to see, what did you want to be when you grew up? Was it always, was this in line with your upbringing?
No. I always wanted to be a teacher. So I think there is an element of teaching that's woven into my role as a nurse and my role as a death doula, for sure. Educating people on like the illness process and the signs and symptoms of dying. Like that's all something, those are things that I really, really love to do. I love to teach people. So as a little girl, when I was standing in my bedroom, like teaching math to my stuffed animals, it wasn't even math. I hated math, but that is not the type of teaching I'm doing today, but there is a lot of education in what I do. So maybe there's a little connection there.
And were your parents or anybody in your family supportive of your decision to become a nurse? Because it's a huge responsibility. I can't really state that enough, right?
Yeah. No, they were all confused when I decided, because I went back to school for nursing. So I originally studied nutrition and food science, because at one point in there, I like wanted to be a chef. I've wanted to be a lot of different things. And then when I went back to school for nursing, they were all like, this does not line up with who, we presumed you to be or thought you wanted to do. But I was really called to, like, I wanted to help people. I wanted to serve people, and I wanted to feel like I was making an impact. And nursing was kind of what I landed on to do that.
Wow. We have similar, I guess. I used to be a chef, and that world, what attracted you to that world? I'm just curious. And then what led you away from it?
Yeah. Well, I grew up watching cooking shows.
All right.
Like I loved, who was it? Rachel Ray, and like even the old school cooking show, like Two Fat Ladies. Do you remember them from like old school Food Network?
No.
And like Emerald?
Yes.
I grew up watching all those TV chef personalities. But I really loved the creative freedom, the ability to just look at ingredients and just like play. Then when I started studying nutrition and food science, I thought maybe I wanted to go into like the research and development side of food, product development, things like that. And then I graduated and I got my first job doing that, like product development. And it was fun. It satisfied some of that creative need. But at that point, I started yearning for like more connection to people. And I think that's when I started to identify like, okay, if I'm going to be doing something for like 40 hours a week, or like if I'm going to be dedicating a lot of my time to this, like I want that deep sense of fulfillment. And for me, at least in the world that I was in like product development and research, I wasn't getting really anything back from it in terms of it fulfilling me. And I had always had an interest in like health and wellness. And so that combination of wanting to like serve people and impact them, and my interest in like health and well-being, that's what led me to nursing.
What type of nursing were you doing?
So I graduated in 2016, and I started my job in a big hospital here in the Bay Area, so it was a trauma, ENT, and plastics unit. So ENT being ear, nose, throat, and plastic like reconstructive. So we would have patients coming in, so they had like head and neck cancers. So they would come in for like, cancer removal and then resection.
Wow.
Yeah, for reconstruction, essentially.
Yeah. Reconstruction.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then trauma as well. It was kind of like a weird combo.
Wow. So when you were training to become a nurse, you knew going in that there would be some pretty... Yeah, I don't know any other way to put it, like gory, gruesome things. Yeah. That's what you wanted to pursue.
I guess so.
But I mean, sorry to put it in that way.
No.
Because that's what I think people normally think about when they think about, I have friends that are in the emergency room and they float between floors, and you see a different side of human beings that it's very intimate. Yeah. Like super intimate. So you knew that going in, and that's... What were the other options you were considering? I'm just curious.
For like a career path?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, what were the other options? Yeah, well, I think one thing about nursing that I didn't realize is how intense it would be. How gruesome some of the stuff I would see. I don't think I knew how intense it was going to be. So it was a huge learning experience, and a very, very powerful initiation into healthcare.
Wow.
For sure. And just human nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So leading up to now, your experiences with the beginning, would you say that your capacity for witnessing these types of trauma, physical trauma, emotional trauma, has that strengthened in you to be able to hold that in? And
yeah, I think my experience around it has really changed for sure. I think in the beginning, it was very much that I was like, I would disconnect myself from it, you know, like seeing like a huge intense trauma or watching someone like die traumatically in front of me. Like my way of coping with that and holding that was to like disconnect with it and like put a wall in between it. And I think when you're in healthcare and you're constantly faced with these like traumatic situations, a healthy distancing and boundarying is a good thing. But I think we have to be careful to not like disconnect from it completely, because then you lose that like that human to human connection piece of it. You lose your ability to like feel and to like care about what just actually happened in front of you. And so I think my experience has changed from that, where I would like fully disconnect and put up a huge wall, to now being in these more like these spaces that are really emotionally difficult, but there's such a there's so much more tender and gentle that even though they are really difficult, I don't have this wall up. I feel like I'm way more able to connect to the people, but also still preserve my own, you know, I don't break down, you know, and I think it's a really fine balance between being able to be present with the situation, being able to connect with the people that are in that situation, and also making sure that I stay whole and complete.
I would love to, you know, go into more about how you do that. But, you know, given why we're here today, the intention of this conversation from the beginning was that we talk about things that, like death, that are uncomfortable, are taboo. And I'm sure you've thought about this a lot. Why do you think that is so in our culture? That there is this disconnect, almost like let's just brush this under the rug until it's time to actually panic and plan for something.
Yeah. I think there's a few different reasons. I think it's worth saying from a biological perspective and like a very visceral perspective, just as humans, we're super unique in the sense that we're animals, right? So we have this evolutionary drive to survive, but we also have this vast intelligence from our prefrontal cortex that gives us an awareness that we're going to die. So like as humans, we like, how do we reconcile our biological drive to survive with the awareness that we won't? Like that produces a lot of, and there's this theory called terror management theory, and that's like the basis of that theory. And that's why we have so much fear around it, compared to other animals.
Right. So you're saying there's like two different parts of our brain that are in conflict with each other.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Okay. Fascinating.
So So I think on a like primal biological level, that is one reason that we don't like to talk about it.
Do you think, I mean, I was talking with a friend the other day, and we were talking about how in our youth, like I'm 40 years old now, but I spend a lot of time in the ocean. And in the ocean, when you're young, at least for me, when I was young, I was willing to take on a lot more riskier challenges. Now that I'm older, those same challenges are very fearful for me.
Yeah.
Is there something in your research or in your education that just, or maybe even in your own experience, develops as we get older to like not take those risks anymore, physically at least?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any psychological models that explain that, but it does seem like the older we get, the more aware we become of our mortality. But I totally think about that in my own life too. Like when I was a little kid, I also spent a lot of time in the ocean.
Okay.
Like I would never do those things now. Like I'm afraid to even put my feet in because I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. What am I so afraid of? That like seaweed is going to brush up against me?
Right.
I don't like
Sharks.
I guess sharks. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know why we develop more of a sense of fear.
So that fearlessness that you were talking about, do you think that that's what pushed you to pursue what you're doing now? Is there some kind of, like, you're conquering some kind of fear within yourself?
That's an interesting question. I don't necessarily, I've never thought about it in the sense of like that I'm conquering a fear, but I have become more aware of the fact that in doing this work and talking about death and educating about death and holding space for people who are dying, there is like some kind of soothing and quelling of my own, like, I guess fear is the right word, or, there is some kind of soothing of my own fear around my life and my mortality. Sure, I don't know. Maybe I have to think about that more.
Yeah, no worries. It was just something that I was just...
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel that when I look back on the jobs that I took on, whether or not they were intentional, they did kind of develop something in me that I never thought that I would. I mean, who works in a restaurant and just imagines... I remember wanting to become a chef, never realizing what it was like to work inside of a restaurant. Have you worked in a restaurant before?
No.
So, yeah, they tell you in culinary school that, hey, become a chef and, you know, you'll I don't know, whatever your idea is. Most people think it's like being a celebrity.
Yeah.
But then when you're finally in it, and if you choose to stick to it, it's like going to, I don't know, war, I guess.
Yeah.
There's like a whole bunch of people who are very hungry and primally tapped into something in their brain that wants something now, immediately. So it translates to the people that work in the restaurant, and then you start to develop a sense of like fight or flight almost, and systems that you start working out in your mind that, okay, you start to build a resilience to it. So I guess that's why I just asked is, you know, I think what you do is could be very horrific to some people, but also very beautiful in my mind. The moments that you see families and even people, I don't know, but it just brings me to something that you wrote on your bio, and you wrote that you believe that our experience of death can be shifted from one rooted in fear and anxiety to one rich with peace and acceptance. And I think, especially me, I'd want that while I'm living.
Yes. Yeah.
So the process that you're helping these people find in their moments before life, I feel like could be applied to everything. Can you talk about that process?
Yeah. And like you totally nailed it. Like the dying is so much more about living than I think most people realize. And we don't have to wait until the end of our lives to transform that fear and anxiety into peace and acceptance and love and intention. But so many people wait until the end because everything everything becomes more focused and potent at the end of life. And it's like, holy shit, like I only have weeks or a few months left. Like I'm either going to be in this space just like holding on and resisting, and it's going to be terrible for me and everyone around me, or if I surrender and just trust this process and recognize that death is like this sacred passage that we all are going to go through, that transition becomes a whole lot easier. Mm-hmm. And that process of helping someone to get there is super variable. And in my work, there's not a clear like, okay, step 1, step 2,
right.
Step 3, step 4.
Yeah.
It's a lot of just meeting people where they are at. And to be perfectly honest, like I'm still working through how to best help people with this. But some of the ways I know how are through meditations, through talking with them about their life, trying to help them derive like the meaningful moments of their life. And in Death Doula work, this is called life review, where you're essentially like casually interviewing them about the highs, the lows, their regrets, things like that, so they can kind of zoom out and see like the picture of their life and where did they have impact, and what are they gonna pass on to their loved ones. So the process of that, like I said, it varies. And the person has to be willing to make that transformation. And I think that's a huge first step is finding out if they're willing.
When you first come into contact with somebody that's in this stage of their life, what is the common mindset for them? And are these people, they're in their last stages of their life, right? Technically, from what I've read, it was like 6 months to a year. Yeah.
Generally, like a hospice patient has, 6 months or less to live. Sometimes they live longer on hospice, but 6 months to a year.
And what do you feel like their mindset is during that time in the beginning?
Yeah, mostly, there's a few exceptions, but mostly people are really, really sad and really anxious. Like extremely sad. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And there are so many emotions, of course, that come with this experience of dying: sadness, anxiety, loneliness, anger, resentment, denial. Like there's so much, and I never want to invalidate any of those feelings because that is a very real part of their experience. But at the same time, I think if we had these conversations about death earlier, if we normalize them, I think there would be more of a sense of, like acceptance, having the sadness and having the anxiety, but also having acceptance and surrender. I mean, there's room for all of it. And like I said, the willingness to allow these other feelings to come in, the acceptance, the surrender, the peace, so that transition is a little bit easier.
When you said there's two parts of the brain that are in conflict with each other, and then you get somebody that just shows up for the first time in front of you, I guess the question that I'm trying to ask, or I'm just putting myself in that person's mindset, is that, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of resistance at first. when do you start seeing that there, or is there ever a moment that there is an acceptance of it? And once they get to that point, what do you feel like got them there? I mean, it's the stages of grief or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Was it, was it something, is it a combination of things? Family, your work?
Yeah. I mean, not everyone gets there. I've witnessed deaths where people are just like resisting until the very, very end. But the people who do get there, I believe it's a combination of family, like love and support. I think talking about the person's life is really meaningful for them. The work that I like to do is like really exploring like all the emotions that they're feeling, like pulling it out of them so it's not just suffocating them, making sure that they're comfortable symptoms wise. That makes a huge difference too. And practically like educating them on what to expect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now that I'm like going to all these places, putting myself in your shoes almost too, because I imagine that it's not like these people could be resistant to even you. Like who the fuck are you to like show up here? And so I think about when you say like meditation and dance and the things that you use. Wow. Was that something that you took on because of this work, or were you always drawn towards connection with your mind, body?
That definitely started before this work. I would say what really like kicked it into high gear was in 2020, I went through a divorce. So navigating that process of grief and loss. And then in 2020, where like, you can't see anyone, you can't do anything. That really created a container for me to just like go inside of myself and really develop these grounding practices, these like integrative practices to help me move through that process. And that I've carried with me since then, for sure. And it's been, I couldn't do this work without those practices. For sure.
Yeah. Do you know what it's like, especially now that you've had time to practice these things, I assume on a daily basis, right? Do you know what it's like to go back before that time? Like, let's just say you've missed 1 or 2 days, what it would be like. Has that ever happened?
Yeah. I'm anxious.
Right.
Yeah. My mind, like, it's hard to come back into my body if I don't do those things. I'll just like live in my mind. And I think our mind is like the worst place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's just so much going on up there. It's not a peaceful place. At least mine is not.
Yeah. I'm the same way. And that's where I feel like I get into the most trouble, is when I'm just like living in my mind.
Yeah.
But it's hard not to. I mean, even with practices in place, and you think that they're going to be the answer, but they're really not. That's why they call it a practice, I guess. 'Cause I, until recently, just started playing with the idea of maybe I don't need meditation anymore, right? Because we were just talking about not being so rigid with practice and not holding on to any ideals, but what's on the other side, I don't want to find out, Yeah, it's tough. 'Cause I've been there before. Living in the mind is what I feel like for example, when we were running the business, like what I told you about as a food vendor, you're always trying to not pinpoint, but pay attention to what your competition is doing. And so that, because of that, you're always scrolling through Instagram, looking at social media, wondering why not me?
Totally.
And that's why I'm just like, done with that. But yeah, I just thought that was, interesting, because you said you welcomed meditation before this line of work. So I guess with meditation, there is a or the unfocus on our own impermanence, right? Living from like breath to breath almost when you're in that state. Do you feel like that is what drew you to this type of work, or helped you in the first place just be like, I can do this, like this is something I would like to explore in myself almost?
Yeah. And partly yes. And my meditation practice has totally gone through its own cycles of, like how dedicated I've been to it and how strict I've been with it. It's totally varied over the past few years. But I do think that it was my ability. So like just going back to my divorce, and I realized like a divorce is not grieving someone's death. Like it's not the same, but it is a death in its own way. It's the death of a relationship. It's the death of a life that I had created. It was the death of my identity at that time. And so I really found a lot of meaning through my process of grieving, through my process of finding a community during that time. I really, like, looking back, as hard as that time was, like it was really, really challenging. Like it to this day, like has been the most meaningful and powerful experience of my life. And I'm a completely different person than I was before that experience. And I think having, like, grief became such a teacher for me, and there's so much medicine inside of it. And my own discovery of that made me realize, like, okay, like I can sit with like really hard shit and I actually kind of like it.
Yeah.
Just because it's just a wellspring of like meaning and discovery, transformation. And that kind of led me into this work, coupled with how my perspective was changing as a nurse and being part of like the big healthcare system. I was sick of seeing like older people coming in for these like insane surgeries that were leaving them in a worse state of living than before they came in for the surgery. Like their quality of life was so shitty after these big surgeries. And I'm like, this person's like 80 years old. Did anyone have a conversation with them? Like, what were their options? I just became like really disillusioned by some of the things that I was seeing. And so wanting to remove myself from like acute care, the hospital system. And then having my experience of like grief and loss and rediscovery and transformation, I was like, hospice care, the end of life, seems like a really powerful place for me to take my new sense of being and really help others.
Wow. That is interesting because, I mean, dealing with the loss of, a divorce on top of the work that you do, which is so emotional, and people expect you to be present. People expect you to be, I don't know, a source of strength almost. Because I've been there, maybe not in divorce, but, an argument with your spouse, and then you have to show up to work. Or even recently, I just learning that one of my friends passed away and then having to show up to work. That's a dark place where you feel like it feels very alone and isolating. And I can't even imagine what that would be like for you to go through that. But you made it. You made it. Yeah. It's crazy that we sometimes forget how resilient we are until we actually throw ourselves in with the sharks almost.
Yeah, totally.
And with that, I guess, going back to hospice care, you mentioned that people end up being discharged from hospice care.
Yeah, they can be.
And so I think that's kind of like a parallel, right? Where you go to a dark place and then you're all of a sudden, hey, like you're going to be living for another, I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
What's that like? What are some reactions you've seen out of people?
Yeah. I haven't seen like a hospice discharge because, well, I'm trying to think. Have I seen one because like a cancer went into remission? I haven't seen any real like celebratory, like, oh my gosh, we're not on hospice anymore. I haven't witnessed that, but I can imagine, because you do hear these stories of like spontaneous remission, which is amazing.
A miracle almost.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So I could see how that would just be like very, very celebratory. In the hospice discharges that I've seen, it's more just like you're not declining as fast as we thought you would. So there is a little bit of like relief. But in those cases, it's still, they still have the terminal illness, but they're not declining as fast as we thought. And we'll discharge people and then they will come back to us when they do start to decline more.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that is good news, though, just because, you are put on hospice care. Someone is put on hospice care doesn't necessarily mean it's not a death sentence per se, Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember you mentioned that you started to question your own profession because of the surgeries that would be. And I know that some people are very skeptical about the medical, I don't know if it's the medical field, but the system, right? And that's what eventually led you to do hospice care and your work as a death doula, right? That's scary in itself, because if people are being given treatment that, that just doesn't make sense, was that like... That was the hard line that you drew to just say, I'm done with this side of medical care or patient care.
Yeah, it was enough. It was seeing that too many times where I was like just feeling like misaligned, like my personal values weren't lining up with the values of this medical system. And I was just burnt out. It was really hard to continue to care for people who were in these situations. And I'm sure for some of them, it was what they wanted, but I think it comes back to your question earlier about like, why do we fear death? Why do we like to sweep it under the rug? And this is another reason, because in medicine, like, death is viewed as a failure. So surgeons, doctors will do whatever they can at all costs to save a life. But like, what is a life? Like, is a life just someone who's breathing and that's it? Or is a life someone who can enjoy and do, even if they can only do it for 2 more months, isn't it important that they're able to be with their loved ones and they're able to, you know, be in their home and watch TV or whatever it is that they like to do, instead of being alive maybe for 6 months, but they're just like, you know, they're either in the hospital that whole time or they're at home, but they're not able to do the things that they love because they're recovering from this surgery or, you know,
whoa,
whatever.
That's heavy.
Yeah.
In preparation for this conversation, Terry Schiavo, does that ring a bell to you? That name popped up into my mind so many times.
Terry Schiavo.
Yeah, Terry Schiavo,
Yeah.
throughout the years. And I'm the type of person, I don't know if you know, but I don't pay attention to the news.
Yeah.
The news to me is what's happening in front of me.
Yeah.
That's until recently because of this whole project. But in relation to what we're talking about today, I just couldn't believe, and sorry if this is contradictory or not in line with what you believe, but I just couldn't believe somebody was kept alive for that long. Like, do you know the story?
Yeah, remind me, because
Okay.
this was a while ago, right?
Terry Schiavo,
Yeah.
27 years old, in 1990, suffered a heart attack. She was married at the time. Because of that heart attack, the oxygen to her brain cut off long enough to where she became brain dead after that.
That's right.
And this happened in the state of Florida, where Jeb Bush, conservative, and then there was this whole back and forth between her husband and the state, whether she was still alive. He didn't want her to, he felt that she would not want to stay alive. And there just became this whole national debate, outcry over what's alive, what is humane.
Yeah.
And then the absurdity of, I'm sorry, I want to respect other people's, but whatever. It's absurd.
Okay.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
To keep somebody alive for 15 years and
Gosh, yeah.
and then going back to what you said, to make the connection, people being given surgeries or given treatment that I don't know.
Yeah.
This is a crazy, crazy, crazy world we live in. Yeah. I don't know why I brought that up, but
Yeah. Well, and I think it goes back to like, yeah, what is a life? Like, how does anyone define what living is?
right.
And she was living because she had vital signs, you know, she was breathing. I mean, even though she had machines helping her do everything, I suppose technically she was still alive because she had some vital signs. But yeah, that's a huge, like, medical
Definitely.
ethical conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I guess I read one of the books that you put on your website, and it was called, Die Wise.
Die Wise.
Did you yeah, I've been reading, probably I'm up to, a quarter of the way through. And it's a very well-written book. I love the way that he just writes things in a very philosophical and just very well thought out words and sentences. And he said, what did he say? He said, I guess when we're born, we're already dying.
Yeah, totally.
And he brings it back to, like, talking about infancy, you're already dying, and Imagine coming up to somebody that's just had a baby and you're saying stuff like that. You would be, get out of here, get out of the room.
Yeah.
You know, is there any part of your work that you feel as a death doula or in hospice care that people get wrong, that you just are unwavering from?
Like in terms of like how they talk about death or like their beliefs?
Yeah. Is there something that might take a little bit more explanation into what you do over everything else?
I think probably helping people see that this time is so like sacred and powerful, and that it's not a failure, and that even though the person may be physically gone, like it doesn't have to be an ending. And it just means that your relationship with them changes.
Right.
Like, how can you continue? And this is me, like, speaking toward loved ones. Like, how can you continue to have a relationship with this person after they're gone? So I think it's probably just having those conversations around, like, death doesn't have to be an ending.
Right. I also think people are fearful of death because of the pain that's associated with it.
Yeah.
Personal pain, of course, and then who knows, maybe you're in so much pain you're not even thinking about the people around you that are also grieving because it's a terminal illness.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you feel that you help relieve that in people?
Well, what is amazing about modern medicine is that we have really great pain medication. And people, there's no reason that people should be in pain at the end of their life.
Right.
If they're not under hospice care, it might be, I don't know, if they can still get, the heavy duty pain medications. But if they're under hospice care, there's no reason that they should be in pain. There's no reason that they should suffer.
Gotcha.
There is a lot of aversion toward, like, morphine is the gold standard pain medication for hospice. People are fearful of it, afraid, because we hear so many stories about addiction and the opioid crisis. Yeah. But when used at the end of life and dosed appropriately and under the orders of a physician, like those addiction things like that are not going to happen. So there are ways to manage pain for sure. And then I think fear and anxiety and emotional pain can exaggerate physical pain. So it's important to address those aspects too. So again, talking to people about what they're afraid of, talking about what they're feeling most sad about. Like, I think it's amazing what just talking can do.
Yeah.
Like, because people we're not encouraged to talk about these big feelings. I think we're getting better at it culturally. But generally people are not conditioned to, like, open up.
How much of your work is talking? I imagine a lot of it, right?
It's mostly, even in my hospice work where I am a nurse and I have some, like, tangible clinical things that I'm supposed to be doing, the majority of the work that I do is literally talking to people. Wow. I love it.
You love it.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I assume you develop relationships with people.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, some people I'm with for like 6, 7, 8 months, and I even still see some of the loved ones. Like, I've maintained relationships with patients, like a couple of their daughters I'm still friends with. So that's been special.
And I imagine too that, like we said earlier, that it's very physically demanding, emotionally, mentally, everything. It demands all of you. You're giving all of you to these people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you, what's the self-care like? Is there a sense of humor that develops in your mind?
Sure.
Okay.
Dark. Thank God I have a roommate who also like has a dark sense of humor. But yeah, humor for sure is a big one. Also, I don't know. I think one of my, we all have our unique gifts, and I think one of mine is being able to be in these really like emotionally taxing situations and not let it deplete me. I definitely do get to a point where if I'm not doing my practices, it can. But I think I'm good at being in these difficult spaces. But in addition to that, dark humor for sure. Journaling is a huge practice for me, self-care. Walks. I love taking walks, and then dancing.
Yeah.
My weekly dancing has been a huge self-care release.
Yeah.
For
What
me.
type of meditation do you practice?
I do not like to do like any guided meditations. I just focus on the breath. So I just sit quietly for 15 to 20 minutes in the morning.
You mentioned that conversation with people, these people that are terminally ill, in pain. And this conversation has been very heavy and lighthearted as well, but moments of laughter with these patients, anything like surprisingly.
Yeah, there's a lot of there are moments of levity for sure. This one patient just popped into my mind. She kept saying that she was just ready to go to the disco. That was like her euphemism. She was this like beautiful woman, like in her 70s, like very glamorous. And she was just like so kind of free and just like ready. And every time I would see her, she's like, it's one day closer to the disco.
Wow. Yeah.
So that was a really special one. I had one patient who I would see twice a week. And he was a wild dude. I mean, he would just share stories with me about like his days, like doing drugs and just like being rowdy at the bar and, just super fun guy. And we would just put on like Eric Clapton, and we would just like listen to music together and just have these really like just fun human moments of like storytelling and sharing. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
How about, and I imagine too that with these dark moments you're also, I don't know, is there any sense of hope, gratitude? I mean, you're seeing people on their way out of life essentially, right? But just transitioning, let's say. Yeah. Does it make you a lot more thankful, a lot more hopeful, or is it just more of kind of like a balance of both light and dark?
I generally feel more hopeful, even though the majority of the emotions that I see people having are like sadness and, fear. It is those moments like it was just yesterday, I was helping a woman who has ovarian cancer, and she just had the most amazing outlook on her life. She just said, just be grateful. Like, she had so much gratitude. She was talking about all the traveling that she had done, all the different hikes that she did. She was a master swimmer. And and laughter. She said gratitude and humor. Like, that's just the key to making it through.
Right.
And that's how she was handling her transition, just like so easily. And it's having relationships with people like that completely like override any of the sadness and the fear and the anxiety.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine everybody, your colleagues are the same way too. Mm-hmm. Just sense of humor. Just
sure.
Yeah.
You have to.
Yeah.
You have to. Yeah.
And I also assume too that there's a lot to learn from these moments, especially the people that, like the guy that you just mentioned, you listen to music to and storytelling. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, there's so much to learn in these conversations, right? Yeah. What's the biggest, I mean, not the biggest, but the most frequent topic amongst people? Do you try to steer away from, that topic of, hey, you've only got so much time left?
Yeah.
Do you make them feel that it's going to be a while?
I mean, everyone's so different. I think I follow their lead, and you can tell which people are going to be more open to having these like exploratory discussions, and which ones are just like, nope, we're just going to listen to music. We're going to talk about, we're going to talk about bird watching. We're going to talk about your favorite bar story. And that is very therapeutic in its own right. Mm-hmm. I think it doesn't always have to be like, okay, we got to get deep. We got to explore the feelings. Sure. Just sitting with someone and listening to music and listening to their stories. Like that's healing in its own way. Mm-hmm.
So by the time you do this for a living, by the time you get to like your loved ones, your friends, your family, do you just, just find quiet time to yourself around people, or are you still the same? Do you like to listen to stories? Do you like to talk about what you go through? Yeah,
a little bit of both. I definitely like to talk about it. Mm-hmm. I sometimes feel like, is this too much? Like, do I need to pull back? I really do love to talk about it, just because for me it's a source of like connection. Like, it connects us in our humanity to like talk about this. And I totally get that like not everyone's going to want to talk about their mortality, and it is intense. I try to talk to my mom about it and she's like, nope.
Wow. Okay.
But I am a like mega introvert, and I love my quiet time. So definitely a balance of both.
Whoa. You're an introvert. I could never tell.
Oh my gosh. There's nothing I love more than like being by myself at the end of the day.
Yeah, you and I both. Yeah. I think there's just like a careful play of being an extrovert and being an introvert, I think.
Yeah.
For some people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine too that your journal entries are, there's no shortage of material to write about.
No
for sure.
No shortage, no.
What is something that people need to be educated about the most with what you do, or with dying in general?
Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple things. I think educating people on the value of like early preparation. So like with Terry Schiavo, right? She was only 27, but when you were talking about it, I was wondering like, well, did she have an advance directive? Like, because when we are able to think about things when we're healthy and in the right mind, like maybe she would have been able to say like, I do not want to be in,
sure,
you state your end of life wishes, so that things like that can be avoided. So I think educating people on early advance directives and continuing to change that in response to any major life transitions like marriage or kids or retirement, etc. And then I also think education around, like, I think people are curious, like, what does it look like to die? What are the different stages of death? What are the general symptoms that we're all gonna experience? So kind of like demystifying the dying process through education.
Yeah, and going back to that book too, and you just brought this to mind too, the different stages of death. It's funny how with our pets, you know, I mean, our pets are allowed that kind of peaceful passing with all family, all their loved ones around them. But with us, it's just kind of very controversial when it comes to that. But education too, as in there's things outside of the normal put yourself in a coffin, have this church ritual kind of death. Did you grow up with, did you grow up Catholic or Christian? Yeah.
I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I mean, it wasn't super integrated into like my household. It was just like what we did, you know? So for me, like, it was funerals. It was a Catholic funeral. And
when you recall your earliest memories of funerals, right? Does that play into what you do now with education? And I guess what I'm trying to ask is, was it, when you think of how the rituals that surround our death practices here in the United States, for example, do you feel like it's something that needs to change about how people view that, in a sense? Because I don't know, to me the Catholic death is very somber and in some terms there's just some kind of, I don't know, when I read about other, like, let's say indigenous forms of death, and then traveling and how death was a community thing. You see the actual coffin being paraded throughout a village or something, right? I guess, does that tie into what you do as well? Is that a motivation?
I think educating people on the different types of options for burial is important. And I do think that our lack of like ritual and ceremony around dying here in Western culture also contributes to like our fear around the whole thing, because we don't have any I don't know, like you said, like the Catholic ceremony, like it's super somber. We don't really have any good traditions that I don't know, help us make sense of what has just happened. And I think that's what ritual and ceremony, like that's why they're so powerful, is they help us ground in this otherwise like very mysterious, like transitionary time. And they hold us as we move through something that's really like kind of groundless and scary, and mysterious. And we're just like lacking that.
I remember watching Coco for the first time. Have you seen Coco?
Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Just to put that front and center in a children's cartoon-ish movie, I was like, wow, this is what we've been missing.
Yeah.
And I'm glad, there are mediums like that allow for that now. Modern times, during our times.
Yeah.
Whereas before we didn't have that, where death is celebrated, and even seeing other cultures celebrate it in a way where, because I work with a school now, and we celebrate the Day of the Dead, and that's a big thing here in San Francisco. But for some reason, I don't know, I've been here for my whole life, and it's never really been like, hey, let's go to the mission and celebrate El Dia de los Muertos.
Yeah.
But at the school, for the kids, I work at a Waldorf school, they set up a shrine for all the kids you can bring in a picture of your loved one. And I heard a story about one student whose grandmother passed away, and she brought in and it was just recently, right before El Dia de los Muertos, she brought in a picture of her grandmother that just passed away to place it with the other pictures, and she just wept in front of the community. And I'm like, wow, what a healing memory for that child.
Yes.
And a lot of these things we do in the privacy of our own solitude almost. I don't know, I'm just really glad that there's people like you bringing education and things like that to light. Even the Death Cafe, like what you said in our conversation leading up to this. And I also read too, and I don't know if you're familiar with, have you heard of the book Desert Solitude?
I haven't.
I think it was written by, I'm blanking on the name, but it was written during the 60s. A park ranger for Arches National Park just memoired his time there. And back then, national parks weren't paved like they are now. It was an actual adventure that you had to drive on dirt roads for. But he talked about the solitude that he experienced there, and how much love he felt for the place, and how much disregard people have, this disconnect with nature.
Yeah.
And he talked about when he wanted to die, like he didn't want his human form to go to waste without giving back to the earth. So he's just like, bury me under a tree where I can contribute at least to the ecosystem and not be put in a coffin to just like turn into ashes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, this is just something that, I guess you need to open yourself up to the world, and it'll just show you if you're not looking for it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, nature has so much to teach us. And that idea of it's called human composting.
Human composting, yeah.
But the science around it is becoming more and more, refined, I guess. And it will be it is a possibility. That is one way to do it. But I think it's going to be more and more available as time goes on, which is really exciting. Because I even hear more and more people wanting these like green burials. The idea of being like embalmed, which is like so weird.
Right, yeah.
Getting pumped with chemicals to then go in a box and then be in the ground. Like, it's so weird.
Yeah.
I think that practice will continue to become less popular, especially like with our generation as we age.
Yeah.
And then tying this into what I saw on your website, which I'm excited to talk about, you pointed to a study about psychedelics.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't remember any explanation as to why you put that up there. But okay, let me ask you now, why? Yeah, why was that placed there?
I think the research with psychedelics at the end of life is really exciting. I think psychedelics are really interesting when practiced like carefully and with intention, and like with these studies, you know, under the care of a therapist and with the right dosing, etc. But these like very early studies have been shown that psychedelic use in people who have terminal illness, their fear of death anxiety is like markedly reduced after just one like guided psychedelic session. And I'm pretty sure the study that I put on my website used psilocybin. So I think, I don't know, I'm really excited to continue to learn more about it as they do more research. And I don't know, psychedelics just have this incredible ability to like connect you to something outside of yourself. And I think for a lot of people, that is where some of the fear comes from. It's because like they don't know what's going to happen. Like, where are they going to go when they die? And for people who have that psychedelic experience, it's like they have that moment of connection to something bigger and greater outside of themselves. And I think that is therapeutic for a lot of people.
Yeah. Have you ever journeyed into that realm?
Yeah, I've done a few journeys, and they've all been like guided, intentional ceremonies.
Yeah.
And I've had actually my last journey, which was pretty recent. I had a similar experience where I felt like I felt like I was dying, which was interesting. And I don't know if it's just because of like the work that I do. So I was kind of primed to have an experience like that. But what I came away with after that journey was like, I have so much more compassion now for the resistance that people bring into their dying experience. Because my journey, it was super physically uncomfortable, and I like literally felt like I was dying.
Wow.
And I just came away with so much more compassion for how difficult it must be to surrender to the dying experience.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I've never had any guided, but I would love to try a guided experience. My only experiences are kind of walking through Golden Gate Park. And those are even profound in itself because, just the losing the sense of self.
Yeah.
I remember drinking out of a water bottle just like this one and just looking at the bottom of it. And I'm like, who's drinking this? But in a sense too, that strengthens the impermanence of everything. And I remember what it felt like before I was 25 years old and just feeling like life is gonna be forever. I'm immortal.
Yeah.
And then once you turn a certain corner, it's like, oh my gosh, there's no going back. There's no turning back.
Yeah.
And then you turn, like I just turned 40 and I'm like, okay, everything I buy now is going to outlive me. And that even is just like, do I even really need this? It's like,
yeah.
And I just embrace that. I remember, you said, the pain, the darkness is what you've embraced more, especially given your experience.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you that too, because I think I associated your divorce experience with just being like so dark and somber, especially in relation to your work. Do you think that these experiences and conversing with these people and even your work helped you get through that in a sense too? Was it easier in your mind now that you look back on it?
Well, I actually took time away from work during that time so I could focus on just like healing. Yeah. There is no way that I could do. Well, I mean, I guess I could have done both, but it was the right call for me to take some time away from work. But I do think that I know that my experiences with dying people, they are healing, and they strengthen me. They help me build my own resilience, for sure. And I mean, I'm just constantly reminded of the impermanent nature of everything, of every moment, of every season, of every cycle. Like, we are constantly in a state of change, and to know that and to like hold it and embrace it, it just, I don't know, there's, I think, more of an ease with which you can walk through life, because you just, I don't know, maybe are less attached to like outcomes or... Wow. And I really try to hold on to that as I like, am trying to start a business, it's like, don't be so attached to the outcome, but like focus on, what's in front of you and who you're serving in this moment. Yeah.
Wow. What is the answer normally when you ask yourself, who are you serving in this moment?
Ooh. I feel like I'm serving, I think it's going to sound so cheesy, but I think I'm serving like everyone. When I get to serve like one person through their death and dying experience, like that ripples out, I think the impact is so much greater than like just serving one person. And the vision and the belief that like death doesn't need to be this thing that we fear, but more this sacred passage that we embrace. Like, I think that vision serves all of us. And it's just a matter of continuing to have more conversations like this, and to helping people, even just like planting the seed of like, death can be different. Can be very powerful.
What do you see when somebody looks at you from their deathbed? Their eye contact.
I've seen different things.
What's the feeling that you
get?
Yeah.
In the moments where I like feel really connected, like there is very much a feeling of like love. Yeah, I think love. Just knowing, or just having that knowing that like death connects us in our humanity. So to sit with someone and to look into their eyes, whether they're feeling fear, or whether they're sad, or whether they're in a state of peace and acceptance, like sitting there with them, it's very much an experience of just like love and human connection.
And this is on a regular basis from people that essentially you really don't know until their last moments in life.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that these people, and it can feel this way too, more than that some people that you've known your whole life. Whoa. Whoa.
Yeah, there have been a handful where it's just like everything's on the table with death. Everything, you know, like it's super raw. And there is this sense of just like a deep knowing, just like on a not self level, but like just on a human level.
Yeah.
On like an essence level, like on just a being's level.
Yeah. And I remember you said earlier drawing boundaries, and that's something that I've been trying to work on with my own self, because sometimes family, there's coworkers, there's you know, your spouse, or you know, it's hard to draw boundaries,
Yeah,
right?
very.
Especially when you're around family of the people, or, well, you're around the dying and you're around the family of the dying.
Yeah.
What's the healthy boundary that you draw? Or is it always kind of like depends on?
Yeah.
I don't know. I noticed that's been a theme too, which is beautiful, that it's not any rigid thing.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely all depends for sure. Just like in any situation in life, there's always going to be people that try to cross boundaries or try to take more from you than you can give. And that certainly happens in my work as well. And I think it all comes down to just like clear communication. Like, this is when I'm available. This is when you can reach me. I'm not always going to respond right away, or I have other, you know, just communicating. I mean, that's like, I guess the practical answer, is just clear communication about like my availability and,
Got it. So this feels like a difficult question for me to ask, because I want to respect your boundaries too. So if you feel like this is a little bit too much for me to ask, then feel free to just skip it. But
okay.
yeah, when you see somebody taking their last breath, do you draw a boundary there? Is there any emotion that's attached to that? Or is that something that you're not even around the room for, but you know is going to happen in the future?
Yeah. I've been in the room a handful of times for people's last breath. And it is always an interesting thing to have to, I mean, the family knows too, like if the family's in the room, like they know too, but it is always an interesting experience to be the one to confirm, because they're looking to you to confirm, like, okay, yes, they're taking, he or she just took their last breath. And as far as a boundary, sometimes sometimes I know when I have to step out of the room and just let the family have their time.
Got it.
And sometimes I know when the family like really wants me to be there. And there's almost like they need me there as like a security. And just like a comfort of having like a professional there. And for some people it's like, no, I'm going to leave the room because this is their time.
Wow. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah.
Is there a common theme that you've seen in people on their way out? Something that they say to you quite often?
Not like a specific phrase, but what is very, very common is people will see dead relatives or friends. This happens all the time, and it's called visioning, where people will see others that have already passed on.
Whoa.
I even had this patient who recently died a couple weeks ago. She had a final meal with her living relatives, like at her bedside, and she like was eating, I don't know, I think she was having like, I actually think she was having ice cream. And she was looking around at all her living relatives, and she was like, oh wow, why are mom and dad here? And she's like 70 years old. Her parents had long passed away, but she saw her parents in the room. And this happens all the time. All the time. People will start seeing people who have already passed away like weeks before they die.
Weeks before they die.
Yeah.
Whoa. So in your mind, do you think that's real? Are they really there?
I have to believe it's real based on the sheer number of times that I have heard this from people. Like, I have to believe that there's like, they are being called, they're being summoned, or their presence is just saying like, hey, it's okay, you're safe, like, we'll see you soon.
Whoa.
You know, just
that's
like
wild.
like some kind of reassurance. But yeah, that happens very often.
Wow. That is wild. And do you let them know? Do you just go with it?
Yeah.
Basically, yeah. Wow.
Because for them, it's real.
Are they having conversations with
Sometimes
them?
they do.
Whoa.
Or they'll say hello.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah,
Whoa.
visioning.
Visioning.
Yeah, I had another woman who didn't recognize the people, but she knew they were friends or like allies, but they started coming into her room like a couple weeks before she died.
Interesting.
Another thing people will say, I guess there are some phrases, but people will say like, I gotta go, I gotta catch the train, I need to get my bags, I have to get my boarding pass.
Whoa.
Yeah, like they're ready. They are ready to go somewhere. I've heard that many times.
Wow. That is something. I just have a couple more, if that's all right.
Yeah,
I want to
for
be
sure.
respectful of your time.
Totally, I'm enjoying this.
Great, thank you. Yeah, what have you learned? What have you learned most about people, and what have you learned most about yourself in this work?
What have I learned most about people? We're pretty attached. We're really attached. We're attached to ourselves. We're attached to our things. We're attached to the idea of how we believe things should be. We're attached. Yeah. I also have learned that like we're all so much more similar than we realize. Like in death and dying, like everything just kind of is stripped away and you're left in like a pretty vulnerable place. And I just see that like we're all so similar. We're all similar in our experiences of fear and anxiety and joy and connection. And it's a good reminder that we're all going to get to this place and we're all going to have this experience. And it just shows that we're so much more the same than we think.
Yeah.
And then what I've learned about myself, man. I feel like that's a big question. I've been learning a lot about myself lately. I didn't realize how, like, integral to my own personal development that this work would be. I don't, it's such a big question.
Do you see yourself doing this, I don't know, years and years down the line?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, like, this work is so vast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as I continue to grow as a person, just in my own practices and in my spirituality, like, this work will continue to evolve, like, with me.
Mm-hmm.
And the relationship that I have with death and dying will continue to serve me as I grow. Like, it's a symbiotic relationship. And I love it.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much nourishment that I get from sitting in these spaces with people. And maybe that's the biggest thing that I've learned about myself, is like how much nourishment that I can pull from these, like, very quote unquote, like, dark spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's so much beauty in holding space for someone who's going through, like, a really dark time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you see yourself doing this much later down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have children of your own?
I do not, no.
Okay. Is that a hope for you one day?
Only recently have
Mm-hmm.
I started to think that,
Mm-hmm.
having children seems like a really, really special part of this human experience.
Right.
And that's kind of how I just see everything. It's like, what am I doing that is going to make this human experience the most, like, rich and nourishing as possible? And I think children definitely play a role in that. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to have a kid. Like, you know, there's just so much there that I'm, like, not ready for. But when I zoom out and I think of, like, the short time that I have here on this planet, having children, I think, is probably one of the most, like, incredible parts of being alive.
Yeah. I'm just asking because, you know, your work is centered around, what did the author say? It's like the death industry or something.
Yeah.
And so just wondering what conversations would be like around your children, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, oh, what did you do for work today, Mom?
Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
let me tell you, how much time do you have?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I would love to also ask you about your work as a death doula, because that's the whole reason why we're here, and we hardly talked about what the whole process is or anything, if that's something that you're willing to talk about.
Yeah. Well, again, my business is, like, very new. My death doula practice is new. And as I've said, it varies.
Yeah.
It all depends. But I like to start with just, like, a phone call and getting a sense of, like, where the person's at, what they need. And then explaining to them, you know, like, what my different services are. And, you know, it's interesting with death doulas, there's no, like, standardization within the death doula practice. It's not like we're licensed or credentialed. Death doulas can take whatever death doula coursework they want. And then we all bring our own unique, like, life experiences and education into our work. So I think the other piece of it is your death doula a good match for you?
Oh, okay.
So I like to just kind of share my background, share what I do. I think some death doulas maybe are a little too like woo-woo for people, and some death doulas are maybe too practical for others. So yeah, it's about finding the right death doula. So I'll explain the different services that I offer. And one of the things that I've found is it's important to work with a death doula. Well, it's ideal to work with a death doula like earlier on in the like disease process, because I've had a call before where there was almost this like there was panic because this woman just needed like so much support. She needed so much help, so much education, and I was happy to step in and support her and guide her, for her husband was dying. But ideally, like, I want to be with someone for at least a few months to really like do this work and really help them move through that process of like, you know, moving away from fear and toward acceptance and doing the work it takes to get there.
Yeah.
So again, it's not like cut and dry. These are my services. This is what I do. It's kind of like, what do you need? Here's what I can offer.
Got it. Got it. Can you hold that thought for a second? Because
Yeah.
I really got to use the restroom.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, look at that.
I know. Gosh, it's such a nice, beautiful day.
I know, it ended up turning out all right.
Yeah.
I woke up this morning and I was like,
I know. A little
how how fitting for this conversation. It's cloudy. Dreary, yeah.
So beautiful.
Yeah, so your work, you're self-employed as far as your doula work goes.
As far as my doula work, yeah.
Yeah. But I assume that, you know, because you can work with the hospice in doing what you do, right? They allow you to do that kind of practice, or?
So to be a doula for patients that I have as a hospice nurse, there's a little bit of just conflict of interest. But as I transition to more full-time doula work, I'm definitely going to focus on building relationships with the hospice companies in the area. And then I already have a relationship with my hospice company. So,
oh, great.
So yeah, I think that will be a huge source of like referrals, I think, will be hospice companies.
Is there different processes for different types of people? I guess, you know, do some people, I guess this is essentially people that want to transition into the next life or whatever they feel like is the afterlife from the comfort of their own home, right? That's essentially what it is, right?
Yeah, like hospice?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, hospice. Because my idea of a hospice is an actual facility where people are. That's not it.
Well, there are hospice facilities,
Okay.
where people can go and receive hospice care. And then there's home hospice, which is what I do, where I go into people's homes. And then there's also hospice. There's like hospice units in hospitals. So it can happen in a variety of different settings, but most people, actually, interesting, 80% of Americans, this was a study done, I think, like 7 years ago, but like 80% of Americans want to die at home, but only 20% do. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, I think.
Yeah. I mean, at least as far as I know, most of the people I know have died in a hospital. Yeah. Which is very sad in my in my experience, because I guess speaking from my experience, most people that I know that have passed in hospitals have either died of stroke or a heart attack, which is why I do the kind of work that I do for myself, and at least trying to keep myself healthy and, stay away from certain types of foods. But it's just weird how almost every adult that I know has gone out that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so most of your work is with people that you're assigned to, or are these people that just hear about your services and they, as far as hospice care goes? Hospice,
people that I'm assigned to.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And then the doula work is all people that it's just, I'm doing my own kind of marketing. I'm doing like community presentations, and like holding death cafes, something like this, just like getting out into the community and making it known that this even exists. Because I think that's step one, is letting people know that there's someone who can help you with your end of life transition. And it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. Like we can make this a powerful experience together.
Yeah. And I think what you're tapping into is also, there's high interest in it, and you're serving a demand for it, I'm sure, because when I told some friends that this conversation was going to be happening, everybody was just like leaning forward, tell me more, because everybody's, we're reaching that stage in life where we think about it, but we don't know the actual steps that need to be taken. And nobody wants to be a burden on anybody while they're on their way out of life. But the death cafes, those are, can you explain what those are?
Yeah, so Death Cafe, they call it a social franchise. So basically they started in, I think, the UK in the early 2000s. And it started as a way to get people to talk about death and dying, as a way to normalize these conversations. And anyone can hold a death cafe. You basically just post about it on the website or in your community. You don't have to have any requirements to facilitate it. It's essentially just a talk in any space. We could do it right here where you have people gather, and it's an open forum. There's no agenda other than to talk about anything related to death and dying. It's not like a grief processing group. It's not an educational seminar. It's just kind of a casual setting to open up the conversation and to make people feel safe and comfortable talking about this. Because I think a lot of people do want to talk about this. Like, even you just said your friends were like, what?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Death is one of those taboo topics that we all kind of are curious about, I think, even if there is a little bit of resistance to talking about it, I think there is this innate curiosity that we all share.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, it is you want to see a dead body? Let me show you.
Since the beginning of time, since the beginning of humans.
Yeah.
That's what myths are. They're stories that help us try to make sense of the meaning of life. I mean, this has been the meaning of life, why we're here, where do we go when we die? These are all these huge questions that humans have been trying to answer for a long time.
So, all right, let's say somebody wants to start a death cafe in their own neighborhood.
Yeah.
All right, you show up, let's say you send out the notice, death cafe at, and then you show up. Then what happens there? Are you moderating the talk?
So I've only done it virtually.
Okay.
But I do want to do them in person. I'm just like over the Zoom thing. It's a great way to connect, but like in person is where it's at. But yeah, I moderated it. I think it depends. If you have more people, then the moderator does less moderating. The idea is for like the attendees to really like drive the conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, the one I did in March, I was doing more moderating than I was expecting.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things that I want to do for my next one, there's this game called the Death Deck, and you know those like conversation starter card games.
Yeah.
It's that, but like for death, and I think that would be a fun thing to incorporate into a death cafe, because some people kind of need that structure or those like icebreakers to get the conversation going. So I think that would be a fun-ish thing to do. It's hard to use the word fun.
Yeah.
These conversations.
Yeah.
I want them to be. I want them to be approachable and enriching, and not like. I don't want people to be afraid to talk about it.
Are you normally somebody who did you grow up with a dark sense of humor, or did it kind of just develop with the work that you do?
I think it's always been a little on the like darker side.
Okay.
For sure.
All right.
Yeah.
So when these taboo topics, the death cafes, what is there something that you could point to that makes people more comfortable to talk about it in your mind? Is it humor? Is it...
I feel like I'm not good at using humor in like the group situations, maybe, because I don't want to come off as insensitive or make anyone feel unsafe. And I think maybe dark humor can be off-putting for some people.
Okay. For some reason, I didn't see it that way.
No, but
no, you're
I
totally
think
right.
there's value in both
yeah.
approaches for sure. But I definitely haven't figured out how to master the like bringing humor into the group setting quite yet.
Right. Yeah.
The dark humor, at least.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
You're totally right. You're totally spot on.
It's a skill for sure.
It's an acquired taste to have.
And an acquired taste.
Yeah, I mean, even on this platform, I find it difficult for me to just, you know. And in general, right? Like, I remember I was at just a meditation, kind of like guided meditation. I don't know what you call it. I rarely do them, but they're like seminars, classes, I guess you would say. And the prompt was, how can you take two things in your life, one dark and one light, and hold them in a playful space?
Ooh.
I was like, whoa, what a concept.
Yeah.
Like you never think of, like, going back to the beginning, death and life, two different sides of the brain. Like, there's a compartment, right? Imaginary compartment. But to hold it in a playful space, I was just like, what a concept.
Yeah, for sure.
What a concept. And it's hard. Like, not a lot of people have, like, a sense of humor. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It has to be some kind of, I don't know, defined logical conversation around it.
Yeah. We're not super good at, like, gray areas or, like, duality, you know? Like, or non-duality, I guess it would be. Just like allowing multiple things to exist at once, or we like things to have clear, defined, like you said, we like to put things in boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something to ponder, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And now I'm going to like figure out how to be funny in groups.
Yeah. I think where this conversation started, and your willingness to be uncomfortable, is why we're here in the first place. And, I don't know, I just admire that. I admire how people relish in uncomfortable situations, and even more so if they put themselves there, which you have. But you've made, you've made this conversation very comfortable, and it's so weird that I'm just like, we've been talking about death the whole time, and but in bringing that to other people, that means a lot to me too, and I would love to hold a death cafe. I normally don't bring people together unless people want to like eat at a table or something. That's my jam.
Yeah.
But hey, let's talk about death.
Yeah.
Where to begin? And unless you just like throw yourself into the discomfort, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool. I guess another reason why I started this podcast is to help just build self-reliance and resilience in people, right? Because I felt like I didn't have that my whole life. It's something that I've had to learn and go through the suck, through the heartbreak and just the difficult times, right? So if you could define resilience and how people get there, how would you say? Sorry if that's such a philosophical question.
No, I like it. I think I'm just like looking around at all these trees around here and all this like diversity and everything. And I think resilience is our ability to, in the face of like hardship, resilience is our ability to like plant our roots even stronger. I think it's our ability to like deepen, to like grow down into ourselves, I guess, in the face of hardship. And to use hardship as medicine for like healing. Yeah, I think resilience is our ability to stand in hardship and face dark times and to find the light, to find the medicine that can help us heal.
Right on.
Yeah.
Do you think that resilience is only found through struggle?
I don't know. Those are the ways that I have found it.
Yeah.
Is through struggle. So it's hard for me to speak to finding resilience in times of like joy. Gosh, I need to think about that. What do you think?
I believe, and this is something that I've adopted more recently. I feel like you need both. You need struggle. You also need like love and self-care. And knowing when to set boundaries, knowing when to rest, knowing when knowing when it's time to, I guess, open your heart to a softness
Mm-hmm.
instead of being tough. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, you know, the way I grew up is you toughen up. You just, you know, shut up and like gut through it. But I also think that opening up and like what you said throughout this conversation is just knowing what is appropriate for certain people,
Mm-hmm.
also for yourself to even just just be what you need to be for that moment. And it's not like what I always thought, like a military tough mind state, where gratitude sometimes is necessary. Yeah, thanks for asking that.
Yeah, no, that was a really beautiful response, and like it really resonated with me. The needing both.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good reminder for me too that those moments of like love and softening are part of resilience too. It's not all about facing struggle. And, you know.
Right.
It's like resilience is like born out of struggle, but it's like nurtured in love and like compassion and self-care. Yeah, and like you said, you know, the language for self-care and for, I don't know, just taking care of yourself, or even accepting the acceptance of something as dark as death is only developed through conversations like this. And did you want to say something? And I think, and I've even said it too throughout our conversation, like kind of associating death with darkness, and it is obviously, it's a very challenging time for the person who's dying and also the surrounding loved ones. But I think the more and more, we talk about death, and if people have the opportunity to sit with their loved ones who are dying and to try to see the like light and the beauty of the process, and like how powerful the transition is, and how much a part of like our human experience it is, I think it becomes a little more light and a little less dark.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And you say that too as the sun
sun's coming out.
The sun's coming out. Wow. Stephanie Crawford, Death Doula. Thank you so much for the work that you do, and just showing up with a complete stranger here in the middle of Golden Gate Park and embracing discomfort.
Thank you.
Is there anything you want to like? I'm going to like put all this stuff on like the show notes and stuff like that, but parting words with our friend, this bee here.
We're just like, it's so great to do a podcast out in nature, especially talking about death, to be like surrounded by all this life. I guess I really want people to know that it's possible for us to change the cultural conversation around death, and to embrace it and to not fear it, because the reality is like it's going to happen to all of us, and talking about it sooner, embracing it, it makes the transition a whole lot easier, and I think it can make our experience of life a whole lot richer.
Yeah. What do you think are some ways that it's become a lot more deeper and richer for you from focusing on death?
I definitely am more present. I think presence is something that I used to struggle with a lot, just like being in the moment. And thinking about my own death and having awareness of my own mortality has really taught me to enjoy like what's right in front of me. I used to stress out a lot about like, what am I doing with my life? Where am I going? But like, what, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just here enjoying it.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'm also starting to live like more intentionally as well. So yeah, presence and intention, I would say, are what death has taught me so far. And I know it will continue to teach me more.
Right on. Thank you, Stephanie, for doing this. I really appreciate your time. And I'm going to officially bring this to a close, I think.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right.
I really enjoyed it.
Right on. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Please check out thequakecityportal.com. Please check out Stephanie's website, awakenedendings.com. Reach out to her on Instagram at awakened_endings. Check us out on thequakecityportal.com. There are additional links, as well as resources and other cool things that I found in researching about this episode. Articles, papers, as well as some of the things that were mentioned in this episode. If you are curious to know or want to expand deeper into some of the terms that might not be explained in this episode. So check out the show notes. We've divided everything into segments so you can easily follow along since these are such long-form conversations. And with that, a final word from Desert Solitaire, a book written by Edward Abbey. Desert Solitaire is a memoir about Edward Abbey's summers spent during the 60s and 70s at Arches National Park as a park ranger. This is from the chapter Dead Man at Grandview Point. Prior to this passage, he and other park rangers end a manhunt by finding a person who was reported lost after his car was spotted in the same parking lot for 2 days. These are his observations. Looking out on this panorama of light, space, rock, and silence, I am inclined to congratulate the dead man on his choice of jumping off place. He had good taste. He had good luck. I envy him the manner of his going, to die alone, on rock, under sun at the brink of the unknown, like a wolf, like a great bird, seems to me very good fortune indeed. To die in the open, under the sky, far from the insolent interference of leech and priest, before this desert vastness, opening like a window onto eternity. That surely was an overwhelming stroke of rare good luck. Each man's death diminishes me? Not necessarily. Given this man's age, the inevitability and suitability of his death, and the essential nature of life on earth, there is in each of us the unspeakable conviction that we are all well rid of him. His departure makes room for the living. Away with the old, in with the new. He is gone. We remain. Others come. The plow of mortality drives through the stubble, turns over rocks and sod and weeds to cover the old, the worn out, the husks, shells, empty seed pods, and sapless roots, clearing the field for the next crop. A ruthless, brutal process, but clean and beautiful. A part of our nature rebels against this truth, and against that other part which would accept it. A second truth of equal weight contradicts the first, proclaiming through art, religion, philosophy, science, and even war that human life, in some way not easily definable, is significant and unique and supreme beyond all the limits of reason and nature. And this second truth we can deny only the cost of denying our humanity. Southwest, toward Grandview Point and the maze, I can see V-shaped black wings in the lonely sky, soaring higher and higher against the yellow sunset. I think of the dead man under the juniper, on the edge of the world, seeing him as a vulture would have seen him, far below and from a great distance. And I see myself through those cruel eyes. I feel myself sinking into the landscape, fixed in place like a stone, like a tree, a small motionless shape of vague outline, desert-colored, and with the wings of imagination look down at myself, through the eyes of the bird, watching a human figure that becomes smaller, smaller in the receding landscape as the bird rises into the evening. A man at a table near a twinkling campfire, surrounded by a rolling wasteland of stone and dune and sandstone monuments. The wasteland surrounded by dark canyons and the course of rivers and mountain ranges on a vast plateau stretching across Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. And beyond this plateau, more deserts and greater mountains, the Rockies in dusk, the Sierra Nevadas shining in their late afternoon, and farther yet, the darkened east, the gleaming Pacific, the curving margins of the great earth itself, and beyond earth, that ultimate world of sun and stars whose bounds we cannot discover. Thank you all for listening. See you all down the road.